I used to do some insurance work, and I came across a guy that said he was a diver from Eden and had just started. And that interested me because I also used to dive, and he said he used to get abalone from Eden and sell them at the Chinese restaurants, and that rather interested me, so I thought I'd follow it through. And the outcome was I left the work that I was doing, which was on the Opera House at the time, and decided I would go down to Eden myself, do a bit of diving and see whether that was, worthwhile for me. But I did see a good future in it. So that's how I started off in diving. Diving at Eden was quite primitive in those days. We used to have tanks that we used to fill up, and not the hooker gear that we've used in later years, but it was quite robust. I liked all the the skullduggery that went around with the fishermen there and the tales, and I thought, this is for me. Looking back, my father was in the Royal Navy and his father before him, so I suppose the sea was in my blood, so it was a matter of this is for me. I went back to Sydney briefly, and I had met a guy who had been a skipper of various vessels, and was interested in purchasing a vessel called the Commissioner. And at that stage I decided that's what I would do. So with the savings that I had at the time, I put it into buying the Commissioner, and I can always remember, because at times you don't think things through totally, and I found that to feed the 14 guys that I had on the vessel, it cost me £124 just to make sure there was enough food to last on that first voyage. And unfortunately, on the second voyage, I wasn't actually on the vessel. I was in Sydney arranging for more money, and I got a call through that it had sank off San Remo, and apparently there'd been a crack in the stern tube, even though I'd had surveyors check the vessel out like you would before you bought something. And I tried to, I had it insured, tried to get the insurance, and unfortunately for me, they said that the people that owned it, the one that represented he owned it, he had 3 other fellows also that were part of the ownership, and their affairs were in the hands of the official receiver. So I was denied, even though they took my money and it was insured, I got nothing for it. So I went back to Sydney, and on anything I could raise, I bought a Haynes Hunter and came to Malakuta, and then from Malakuta to Cape Everard. And Cape Everard was 40 miles from Cairn River, along virtually a dirt track. It's now called Point Hicks, and set up a camp there. And the people that were actually working for me at that time were Bob Usher and Noddy Hill. And we set up a camp just by the river, and they used to launch vessels, or my 2 vessels that they worked from, and we take our abalone in to Tom Bidwell. He used to be the buyer. Just going back a little bit, at Malakuta, the group of divers there never wanted anybody else in there. So when I got there, they said to Tom Bidwell if they bought my abalone, then they'd find another buyer. So unfortunately for me, I lived on a camp at Bastion Point, and I used to have to, after diving all day, drive into Cam River to sell my abalone, and that went on for a number of months until finally I decided it was cheaper for me to go and set camp up at Cape Everard and work my two vessels, two Haynes Hunters, one a 17 foot and one a 19 foot. And Bob Usher came down there working for me, and Noddy Hill, and we did very well, because it was not often that the guys from Malakuta would go down that far. It's nearly 60 odd miles by sea from Malakuta to Cape Everard. So yes, it went very well, and I later went back to Sydney again and decided that I'd come to Portland. So in 1968 I had an accident with the HR station wagon I had, and was unable to trail the 19-foot Haynes, and got an old Chevy from a friend down the road. His name was Dennis the Menace, and he wanted some adventure. So we struggled through to Portland, but halfway through the oil pressure dropped to virtually zero, and we pulled up at a service station. It was a really old service station, and I really had my heart in my hand. I thought, I'm not going to do any good here. But an old guy came out and said, I understand you got the problem, son, but we can get this heavy gearbox oil as long as you don't turn the motor off. It'll get you to Portland. And he was right. He got me to Portland. And I ended up going to the Centennial Caravan Park, and I set up my army tents and vessel there. And the first day's diving, unfortunately for me, I had an asthma attack. And I'd got, I think it was about 50 kilo of abalone, and ended up in hospital. But the 50 kilo of abalone was enough to see me through till I was out again. And of course, from then, everything just rocketed forward. Everything was really good. Virtually all the guys in Portland were guys that we virtually arrived here all at the same time, because Sawyer and Fegarth were part of the group in Malakuta that didn't want the newcomers, and I was a newcomer from Eden. They said, we don't want you guys from Eden now down here. And it wasn't just, I mean, it was just, rivalry. I always remember they used to have to get out through and over the bar. But because I was at Bastion Point, I had rubber rollers to roll the boat in and out of the sea. And I was able to work maybe 4 or 5 days, and I got very upset. The fact that I was working, because the bar was too big for them to get their boats out of. When they finally get out, I can always remember Sawyer being in the front saying, how you going? What are you doing? You've been out here working for a while. But anyway, it was all, friendly rivalry, and there seemed to be 2 different groups at the pub. When you went out to the pub to have a drink, it was them and us, and there was a few guys working for me. So I suppose I can understand they wanted to keep it for themselves. And of course Gable Island and all that area was shallow, but also so much abalone. It was just unbelievable, you know. So I can understand why they wanted to keep it to themselves. And of course in those days, just to make mention of it, I used to get 9p a pound. It was before the pound, shillings and pence days, you know. I mean, before the dollar days. So 9p a pound was what we used to get for it. But it was still better than working for, you know, for a boss somewhere or for rigging. In those days, it was a matter of shelling your abalone at sea. And to give you an instance, I had one December, I had 19 days straight. And when I say 19 days straight, it really wears on your body. You have rubbed the skin off your shoulders and off your elbows. You know, here it's just the continuous movement. And I used to rub raw. And you used to put elastoplast, and that never used to work. And you used to put up with it. But 19 days straight, one day after the other. And to give you an illustration, I had Tony Beersaw that actually came to work for me on this particular December. And he bought himself a second-hand Ford Fairlane, and he was ecstatic. He couldn't believe he'd made so much money. It's more money than he said he made for the whole of last year. But the catches were anything from 400 kilo to 1,000 kilo. And the weight, yeah, that's meat weight, not shell weight, meat weight. So it just shows you what was possible in those days. But yes, I mean, gradually over the years, we used to have our various meetings amongst ourselves, the divers, and we decided that we'd put to the government that we'd bring a shell law in. Because in the early days there wasn't a shell law, and obviously if you want something to last, you can't take the young abalone. And the old measurement was 4 3/4 of an inch at the widest part of the shell. So you would have on your ab iron, which you'd prize the abalone off, you would have the measurement. So you could actually, and it all became quite natural. You'd prize it off and you'd put your abalone there flicking in your bag, and it just like flick, you know, flick. Then your parachute was a lifesaver, because in many instances you get into trouble. It doesn't matter if you're diving day after day after day, because often you put 6 to 8 hours underwater, and it's a lot of time. And you'd have a large bag, and often, for most of us, you'd still be diving at 60 feet or 70 feet, or sometimes deeper. And you would be in a situation where your line would get caught up behind, you know, other, you know, the rocks. You might get a kink in your hose and your air would go off. And in those days we didn't even have reserve tanks. So if your air went off, or if you got a kink and you couldn't breathe, then the air in your bag, which would expand as you go up, would in many ways be a lifesaver for you. I had one very frightening time at Bridgewater. In one of the holes, it was about 70 foot, a lot of abalone there, and there'd been a wind change. And with the wind change, it put my hose over the bull kelp. And I was down to 70 feet, and the only way I could get back to the boat was through the bull kelp. And I realised that it was no good to do that, because the waves crashing over, I just wouldn't be able to get through, because it wrap itself around you. So I had to make the decision to disengage my regulator and swim around underwater and come up with no air. So it was the only thing I could do, because I realised I was either going to drown. You could see it was like a washing machine up above, and I swam around under the boat. And the strange thing about it, I suppose, it's the adrenaline in your body, that it seemed effortless. It didn't seem to be a problem at all. And I was so glad when I could see the boat above me, and I went up and just arrived, because then we could pull the hose in, because it wasn't attached to me. So I was able, to save the hose and pull it in. But there's many instances where we've had problems like that. I had a problem over at Julia Percy, and it was a very flat day, and I was working in an area where it was very shallow and there was lots of abalone. And just out of nowhere we had swells come through, and they were washing over me, and ended up bashing me against the rocks. It took my face mask off, took my flippers off, so they were gone. And just going back a little bit, that just prior to that, Bob Usher had come round with his boat and said his compressor had failed, and could he dive off my boat, because I always had two compressors. If one failed, I'd have another one. And I said to him, yeah, that's not a problem. Hit your boat. And it actually saved my life in many ways, because his sheller and he jumped on my boat to start diving, and this is when the swell started to come in. And with the three of them, they were able to pull me out. And I can remember sinking as I'm trying to get back to the boat, and, sort of losing consciousness. And I was thinking to myself, I'm so close to the boat, but I'm not going to make it. And I passed out. The next thing, I'm in the boat, and when I wake up, I'm spewing water, water's coming out of my mouth and whatever. And I lay there for about half an hour, and everybody went home, because there was about 4 or 5 boats there. So, it was the closest I've ever been to really drowning. So, it just shows you at times you do a good deed, and then something comes back to you. So, these things do happen.
Yes, that's a good story, that. Yeah.
But, all the stories you actually hear about fishermen, generally, we'll all help each other. It doesn't matter what. If somebody's in trouble, you'll tow them in, or you go out. I had, when I bought my vessel, the Sea Eagle, which is the skipper craft, I had the guys deliver it from Adelaide. And it just shows you how people can help you. They got as far as Cape Nelson, and we had the thickest fog that you'd ever believe. And I get a call where somewhere just past the lighthouse at Cape Nelson, can you help us? We really are in trouble. I rang John Seeley, and John Seeley, with his boat, with me and his boat, we went out, found them, and brought them in.
So, sharks and ways that you might have, I'm thinking of Bernie Morton, I suppose, with his striped wetsuit and stuff like that.
Bernie Morton's thoughts on staying safe from sharks was wearing a football jersey, being black and yellow. And I personally don't think it makes any difference whatsoever. I think, if anything, as far as sharks are concerned, air bubbles will frighten them away more than any. Because, again, we don't know whether they're colourblind or not. So, it mightn't mean anything, but he was happy with it.
And I saw a shark, and the thing to do when you saw a shark was to grab hold of the air hose and give it 3 good hard yanks. But he came up, we sat there for about 20, 25 minutes I suppose, and didn't see it again, so down he went again. Yeah.
I was out at the passage, and as you know, at the different levels on your sounder, you have your grey weed on the top, and then it drops down into clear gullies. And I was working through the weed, knocking abalone off, and as I'm coming out to the gutter, I was shocked to see a white pointer, and his eye seemed to jerk as it was looking at me, and it must have only been about 10 feet away. And straight away I thought, I've got to get back to the boat. And normally you would pull yourself along with the hose in front of you this way, and instead of that I went the other way to look at the shark. It went off into the gloom, and so I would pull it to the side and keep my eye on it. And to my horror, from the gloom it came back. It passed me again, and I'm thinking, am I going to get back to the boat? Instead of pulling this way, I'm looking at that. And it went off into the gloom again, and each time it's getting closer. Now, this shark wasn't a huge shark. It was about 8 or 9 feet. And I've seen bigger white pointers, but obviously it had an interest in me. So after about 3, or could have been 4 passes, I got under the boat and straight up and into the boat. And a little later, you see its fin on the going around, and off it goes. Now, talking about that, I used to have a seal out at Lawrence Rocks that for a matter of, might have been a month, always used to come to my bag, and it was blind in one eye. It was white, and it put its head into the bag, and it wouldn't eat the abalone. It'd throw it up in the air. It'd just flick it up like that in the air, and I used to pat it. And yeah, he just had one eye that was white, so obviously it was blind. But yeah, I don't know what happened to it, because then I never saw it anymore. But again, probably a shark got it, I suppose.
Did you have any signals up to the cellar on board?
Yeah, we had a set of signals, and the set of signals that we had, if there was a shark down below, and I wanted to come up, I used to pull the hose, but in quick jerks. It wasn't like 2 or 3, but it kept on jerking. They knew that I had a problem, or there was a shark. So any other time it was just a steady pull. If you wanted them to pull you in for some reason, you just pull it, there, and they could feel it going out. They could feel you pulling on it. But if it was jerky pull, they knew that it was a matter of pull you up. But also at Cape Nelson, I was surprised to see I was down in about an 80-foot level. On the sounder, you go down to where the cray kelp is, and then it's all, then you go off the edge and you go down to about 100 foot. But there's abs on the side of the wall, and you chip them off into your bag. And I was chipping away, and the bag was nearly full. And I'm looking around, ready to go up. And here I've got, probably about, I suppose, I don't know, maybe 60 feet away, was a white pointer. It would be about 5 meters. And they look so big, and I decided to go up, get into the boat. I never saw it again underwater, but when I got into the boat, it actually surfaced. I saw it on the boat. The other thing that's happened to me, we've got a bay called Jones's Bay. It's a bay I used to work all the time, just before Murrells, and I knew it intimately. and we had some orcas there one day, and I was apprehensive, but I didn't get out of the water, and they came right close to me, and of course they're white and black, and I'm thinking, my God, I only hope they don't bite me in two, because they're able to do that. And anyway, they were there for a while, and off they went. But yeah, that was, for me, it was good. I couldn't believe I could be so close to something like that. And at other times, going from Cape Nelson to Cape Bridgewater, well, we've had so much tuna. There's tuna just everywhere. You just can't believe how much tuna there is. So, yeah. But if you love the sea, then there is so many things to really be glad about. Fresh air, and it's even all those times where, like in the early days with the Haynes Hunter, you'd come back and you'd have salt encrusted on your beard, like it'd be white, and you'd have marks on your face from where your face mask's been on all day. But and you'd cop the waves coming over you the whole time. I always felt sorry for the shellers. They used to wear wetsuits at times, but other times they were wet through. Yeah.
Worst times we had would be when it was raining, I suppose, and you had to pull a bin over your head to keep dry. And in the finish, I got an old wetsuit top and used to pull on. That was another job you had to do for the divers too, was to help them get their wetsuit tops on and to pull them off as well. Yeah, and they're quite tight fit.
I can always remember taking a guy out called Tony Wright, and he works for or used to, for the Observer. And he came out on my vessel because he wanted to see what it was like. And I can remember coming up with a bag, and we were at Murrell's, and he's got his head over the side throwing up. I thought, oh my goodness, But yeah, because we've had that times where you've had a sheller that's never, and he'd come out as an observer, not as a sheller, but at other times where you have a guy thinks he can do the job, and all you find is he's lying on the bottom of the boat, so you've got to get in and pull your own bag in. But some of these things that happen, you look back and it makes you laugh.
Yes, you must have had some rough trips home, and that's what you're saying.
Sometimes we had some rough trips home, and times from Cape Nelson to Cape Grant, where you go into a hollow of the waves, you couldn't see Nelson and you couldn't see Cape Grant, and then you'd come up on top of the wave and then you'd go down again. Yes, and you'd be at quarter throttle because you couldn't go any faster. You just drop off a wave. When I used to go to what we call Jones's Bay, or all the guys call it Jones's Bay, so I call it Jones's Bay now, not for any other reason that they called it Jones's Bay, is that they'd go to Bridgewater and they'd go to Rugged and they'd go home. And the sheller would say to me, "We're all going home, it's about time to leave," and it'd be fairly calm. Where I was tucked away. So I'd work for that extra bag. And of course, when you went out and around the Cape Nelson, you realised just how rough it was. And you're only in a 19-foot vessel, up and down, quarter throttle. And at times you think that you weren't going to make it, but obviously you did. But what we used to do, we used to take the bung out, and the water would drain out. You'd take so much water on the boat that because you was on the plane, the water would drag out through the bunghole. Another time I was over the island and I had Tunner, and he was a Solomon Islander. He was a black guy. and he was one of the best shellers I ever had, and we were over Julie Percy. And we were coming home with a good load, maybe about 600 kilo or 700 kilo, and we'd just taken it steady. It was fairly rugged, because a lot of guys used to drive and put their boats in a Port Fairy, but I used to go across from Portland. And he said, "Hey, look around, there's sharks." And whether it was the abduce that was going out of the back, you could see the fin of a white pointer following the boat. And after a while, anyway, it disappeared. But he'd gone from black to white. He was very concerned. But yeah, we had our funny times, but we always seemed to get back. It was good.
What about the cold? What can you tell us about the cold?
At times it could get extremely cold, and at times you could feel the difference in the temperature in the water, because I've found that with the way the water flows through, you can feel it on your face. But you would get like hypothermia to a degree, where you'd get on the boat and you'd be shivering and you couldn't stop shivering. But I used to take my wetsuit off and get into something warm straight away as soon as I got on the boat. And unlike most of the guys, I never used to stop for lunch. I never used to eat on the boat. My belief was that the gases in your body from what you eat can create problems for you. So I used to get in the water, bring my bag up, go in, go down and get another one. And I keep going all day until what I believe was the end of the day. And what I was surprised at, in many places where abdivers reckon there weren't any abalone, where there were. Because in many places the abalone just look like rocks. There's some beds there where I've had a noddy for, in one instance, there was a place inside Nelson. He left the area and said, "There's no abs there." And I went there and I got about 600 kilo.
He'd look under the ledges where they never used to. They'd just take what they saw off the rocks, and he'd look under the ledges and put his hands under there and feel them. And we got quite a few abalone that way.
There's little rock ledges, and if you put your hand under, you will find shelves. Out at Cape Nelson as well, I've come what I call whitebacks, where in caves, you'll find abalone in caves. And they haven't got any growth, they're clean on the back and they're more of a white. So I can remember a time bringing up a bag of abalone and the sheller saying to me, "God, they look so different, they're all white." But they were from inside the cave, and I would imagine the weed has gone into the cave, and as you know with an abalone, it lifts itself up and clamp down on the weed and feed itself into the mouth. So yes, you can find them in all sorts of places. I also can remember again in Jones's Bay, there was a cave there where you would breathe out and the light was coming through, and it creates trapped air, and you can see a reflection of yourself in the cave. So yeah, there's lots of little strange things that do happen at times, where you think, "Hey, this is something special." This I have seen starfish chasing the bigger ones. You'll find. Yeah, and you get a whole range of different colour starfish. But if you get one and you put it on a wall of abalone, it will move towards it and the abalone will move away. That will happen. It does happen.
Did you ever have the bends?
Yes, I did. I had the bends at the just off from the lighthouse at Cape Nelson. I used to dive deep, but I'd only spend 4 or 5 minutes on the bottom before I came up. And I'd come up to different levels, because you have different levels there. On your sounder, you can go down to a 20 or 30 foot level with cray kelp, and you can go down to 60 foot level, and then you can drop right off to the bottom, which is 100 foot level. And this particular time, I had gone down, and I'd been down probably 2 or 3 minutes. I had about half a bag filled, because I was chipping it off the wall. They were just falling into the bag. And the next thing, no air. And what had happened, a squall had come through, and I had 400 foot of hose out, and I had the hose tied also to the bar. I have like stainless steel bars on the boat. So I had some rope tied onto it to the bar, which actually saved me in this instance. And the hose actually had pulled out from the bayonet fitting. So it wasn't the compressor stopped, it was it had pulled out, and I had no air. And unfortunately, it's a terrible feeling. It's a feeling of you just sort of suck, your tongue goes there, and you can't, there's no air, so you've got to come up. So you've got to realise that coming up with your air, the bag expands in the air to take you up. And I probably came up too quickly, so I had the bends. And I went down to a hydrobaric chamber in Melbourne, and I have a shoulder replacement on my left shoulder, because that was holding the hose. That was the highest joint, and the bubbles go to the highest joint. So yes, I was a bit disoriented when I hit the surface, but it is a terrible pain, and they call it bends because you're bent up. You want to curl up into the tightest ball that you can get into. And with that, we drove down to Melbourne. I got them to drive me down in my panel van, and I was curled up on the back. But they
in a bit of pain?
Yes, in pain all the way down. I had nitrogen narcosis once, and that also was at Cape Nelson. And it's surprising how you have to rationalise with yourself, because I was down and I could barely get any air, and I thought, gee, the air's going off, something's going on, and then it seemed to be getting easy. And I was thinking, oh yeah, well, I don't know why, it seems to be easy, but I'm deep. Well, what's actually happening? And I started to realise I'm not thinking properly. So straight away I started to move up, or try to move up and get more air in my bag to move up. But I definitely was at those first stages of wandering in my mind, thinking, I'm okay. And you actually start to think about even breathing water. It's sort of, you know you're not thinking right. Something says to you, go up. So, yes, it's a strange feeling, but I suppose we're very fortunate that we didn't have any deaths in Portland, really, because there are different things you discover all the time of what your body's capable of doing and what it's not capable of doing.
Yes. Do you have any particular favourite places you would wait for the weather to get to?
Yes, two special places, one Aeroplane Bay over on the island, and the other was my favourite, well, I've got three favourite spots, was Lawrence Rocks. A lot of people used to dispute Lawrence Rocks, but I always found that there, and I loved the cable kelp. In amongst the cable kelp, you'd always come home with a crayfish. It wasn't very far from Portland, and also Jones's Bay. With Lawrence Rock, I know every area around it. I know the little bay on both sides. I know the little areas and hollows, and I mean, it's just like your own garden, you know, like you know all these areas. I can remember one little place at Lawrence Rock where it was like a grass garden. I can remember one summer just lying out there thinking, my God, I'm breathing underwater and I'm just lying out as if I'm lying out on my grass. And yes, and of course, with the cable kelp as well, you have fish that swim up to you. The other thing I never mentioned, which is funny, but it really annoyed me, I was round at, I think it was Jones's Bay, because I used to fish there in Murrells often, and I had a fish lamp onto my lip. Actually, it drew blood on my lip, and it may be because your lips pout, because you've got the regulator in. It must have said it, and I had to hit the fish off my lip. And the other occasional thing is you have a conger eel, you'd be knocking the abalone off there and it'd dart out and it'd give you a bit of a fright. Yeah. So, and other times, I've had a couple of encounters with octopuses too, in areas where you get abalone and there might be a cleft in two large rocks underwater going down, and you're working away and you come across an octopus and it squirt ink at you and it'll go hazy. But I never had one lamp onto me. I have heard where they've lamped onto somebody's bag or whatever, but that hasn't happened.
So, what do you think of it all looking back, Tony?
Well, I wouldn't have changed it for anything. It's probably, there's something about the diving and the adventure and the different guys in the industry. I mean, there's a lot of, what should we say, rivalry, but in many ways they're all good guys, all independent. And I look back and think, what a wonderful way of living. I was always surprised that the government didn't look at it in the way. I can remember Fegith, Sawyer and myself went down to see the government at the time to try to get some regulations in the industry, and they virtually showed us the door. They said it'll never be an industry, you know, we're not interested in what you've got to tell us. But really, it just shows you can have people in high places that are uneducated and dismiss something before they really look into it. Because I always believe the old saying, if you're at the coalface, you know what's going on. And it doesn't matter what you do, whether you're a cray fisherman, tuna fisherman, abalone, you learn a lot of things, and people should take notice if they're looking after the whole industry, you know, like fishing. Anything we export that brings dollars into Australia is a benefit to everybody.
What were the best times?
The best times? Oh, the best times, I suppose, is when you're coming home and you've got a really good catch, and the sea is not bad, and you're skimming along the surface and you're thinking to yourself, my God, you know, I wouldn't want to do anything else than this. And I'd go to Murrells, hearing that it had been cleaned out, and I get tremendous loads. Now, in that particular time that they'd fished, and those areas that they reckon they'd cleaned out, you have abalone coming from different places that they haven't seen and are occupying the better spots. Because it's something that I have noticed, that in places that deep, not only deep, but over all the years, and it must be, I suppose, thousands of years, there's been abalone, that you get hollows where the actually abalone have sitting, so actually it's worn away the actual sandstone or the actual limestone. So you get these little pockets, and I suppose from their point of view, from an abalone, I suppose they look for a better spot. And as the weed comes through, they're more protected because they can raise themselves up, pull it in, and put their shell down, and they're in like a little more protected area. So there's little things that that you see and you learn like that. So they do come back, but they must move around quite a bit, probably a lot more than we think. You see them stationary. I mean, you do see them move too. You can drop them and out of your bag and you see them sort of move along. But generally, they're just sitting there, all over the place. But when you scoot back, and they will come back. And that's why I used to dominate the Jones's Bay, all those different areas. What I used to do was, when the guys came by, I used to throw my anchor out of a certain area and they'd see where you were working, and as soon as they'd gone, I'd pick the anchor up and I'd work another area. So the area they thought you had worked hadn't been worked. So they could never understand why you got so many abalone out of that particular area, because it's quite a big bay. But it becomes like your own garden, and you know your little drop-offs and areas and little caves, and yes, it's it's adventure in itself. It's really good. Getting back to Lawrence Rocks. Lawrence Rocks, that's where there's a mix of two lots of abalone, and the actual rock itself is blacklip. But a little bit further out, you come across an occasional greenlip. And of course, on the north shore, there's a lot of greenlip. And I'm sort of surprised that, because a lot of guys wouldn't work the greenlip, because the amount of time it takes you to get a bin of greenlip, you could get 3 bins of blacklip. But it's a difference in the weather. If the weather's southwest, maybe you could normally you work here on the north shore. But if it's the other way, you'd work blacklip. And I worked greenlip for quite often, because I was very curious. It was shallow water, and that's good. And I was surprised at the size of the greenlip that we have here. So right down to the Fitzroy River, I used to dive all the way along there, and I used to get quite good catches of greenlip. But at that time, I think it was all the same price. So obviously, you'd be better off getting blacklip for the time. But if you couldn't work around the front and you wanted to work, you could work out on the greenlip if you knew where to go.
You'd see a few wobbegong sharks, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah. And actually, I've had some funny. It's funny what you do as a diver with rays and also wobbegongs. They'd lie on the bottom, but they might be lying in an area where there's good abalone. So you get your abalone and you hit them on the tail, and they scuttle away. And sometimes they sort of turn on you to give you a bit of a worry. But the same with rays. You have a stingray and you hit it on the back of the tail and it'd scoot off. But I never had one turn on me. There's funny little things that you come across there. You see your shark lying on the bottom of the sea. But that used to be quite a thing down on the North Shore. You often got wobbies there lying on the bottom.
While I was working with Tony Jones, we went down to the mouth of the Fitzroy River to see if there was anything down on the reefs down that way, but couldn't find anything. So he got me to drive the boat and tow him along all the way back along shoreline to see if he could find any more reef. Well, we found a bit of reef. And that was probably out near the A-framed house there, or maybe a bit further back towards the Surrey River, somewhere in between there. And so we dropped the anchor, and he jumped in the water, and he was out again in 5 minutes. I thought, oh, what's going on here? And anyway, he come on board the boat and he said to me, put a pair of goggles on and stick your head over the side and have a look. And I counted 13 wobbegong sharks. So that was why he was back on the boat within 5 minutes.
But it was always annoying because it used to be where the reef hits the sand, and that's where they seem to lie, and that's where the abalone generally were. So you had to, get rid of them to knock off your abalone.
Or something like that.
Well, I got a large anchor, and it was somewhere near the blowholes, and it would be about 6 foot high. And actually, I used to have a house down the Dutton Way, and it should still be there if they haven't moved it, because I used it as a centerpiece in the garden. So that was one of the anchors that I got from around the blowholes, and I'm not sure what ship it was from. But yeah, there are different things that happen. You have these. I can always remember Bernie and Dick. Now Dick Kelly was a tall guy, he must have been about 6'2", and of course Bernie was about 5 or 6, and they're getting into some scuffle on the Savco Wharf. Then you've got little Bernie, and he's punching him, and the other one there, and they're rolling around, and of course everybody's laughing, and they were serious and whatever, but it was just, some of the silly stuff that sort of happens, but again, you have these things sort of happen, but I wouldn't have changed it for anything. Yes, like some of the photos in that book, life was that way. It was difficult, but it was good. And often, your meal was fish or abalone. But no, I wouldn't change it for anything. It's just amazing how quick life passes by.